Okay, so this is where things get a little bit more interesting. So far we've dealt with note sequences and then groups of notes as chords. Um, what we can also do is now down here with this is chords variable. Again, if we've got a nested list here, we always have to have this as 1. Now this next variable is interesting. So if it's chords, we have the opportunity to, if it's not chords, if it's 0, then this again, you can see this little bit, if is chords is 0, then is ARP has to be 0. So even if you were to set this as 0 and this is 1, this really ends up being 0. Like you can put anything here and it doesn't matter. It will automatically redefine it as 0. In the last example, we had it set like so, where we're saying that there are chords here. There is a nested list, but we're just treating these chords. We're playing them almost like we are arpeggiating this group of chords. Meaning, if this is if we're almost treating it like this is one note, this is one note, and this is one note. Again, the ARP order section where we determine the order of playback, this would be index 0, this would be index 1, this would be index 2, and so forth. So you can almost treat it like you're arpeggiating this group, this kind of matrix of chords. If we set this to 1, as you can see, I commented just to give a little bit of a guide here. 0 is play the chords at ARP rhythm. If we set this to 1, the ARP begins to arpeggiate these chords. Now, this is where the behavior of the chords themselves becomes a little bit different, and we have to keep this in mind. This is one of the idiosyncrasies of the program, I will admit, and was just sort of a natural development of the way things came together. Again, I think someone who would be better at this than me would find another way of doing this, but just kind of bear with me as it is. So we're now arpeggiating the chords. Well, we're still dealing with the ARP order here in terms of determining the order of the arpeggiation. Let's turn auto generate on, so it's disregarding this. So it's just going to go through index, whatever chord it's on is going to be, it's going to go index 0, 1, 2, index 0, 1, 2, for the duration that it's on each chord. Well, so how long is it on each chord? The actual arpeggiation is going to be still dictated by this ARP rhythm. But the order of the chords switch is going to now be determined. It's no longer going to be determined by this ARP order. Before, when we were just dealing with chords with this set to 0, the chords themselves were treated as the arpeggiated notes, so they were being determined. The chord changes were being determined by the ARP rhythm. Now, because we're arpeggiating the chords, the arpeggiation is determined by ARP rhythm, but the actual chord changes are now determined by this section here. Now, so there's a few new variables here. Chords when is ARP. So in other words, when this is an off-on sort of affair, if you have this set to 0, you're just going to hear the arpeggiation. You're not going to hear the chords themselves. Now, again, this doesn't affect if you've got this set to 1 and 0. In other words, we're not arpeggiating. You will still hear the chords because the chords are playing on the ARP instrument essentially. So again, I admit that this does get potentially a little bit confusing. Once you get used to using it, it'll start to sink in. So where is it? Okay. Chords there. So if we're arpeggiating and we want to hear the chords, let's set this to 1. Right? So play chords when is ARP is on. So we want to hear the arpeggiation and the chords themselves as kind of an accompaniment. Here's where you can set the actual channel of the chords. So again, the arpeggiation instrument is determined by this down here. So we're going to have the arpeggiating melody, we'll call it, playing on channel 1. And the chords themselves are going to be playing on 2. So if we go to Ableton Live, so our arpeggiation is going to be coming through on this instrument, and our chords are going to be coming out on this instrument. One thing I forgot to mention last time, you were hearing it, but I didn't mention it, is this auto-generated bass part. And that's determined right here. Auto-generate bass. If you have this as 1, again, off on, 0 would be off, 1 is on. So I had 1 on and I forgot to mention it, but I'll mention it now. So what this does is it generates an auto-generated bass part as an additional accompaniment. So even though we're really dealing with one part here technically, in terms of how the program is thinking about it, we're dealing with one collection of notes. We potentially have as many as 3 actual musical parts being generated from that. We have our arpeggiated notes, we have our chords, and then we have this auto-generated bass part. And here's a couple of handy little additional variables to control this. The bass octave, you can set 0 as just kind of no change. You can have it up an octave, you can have it down an octave by setting it to a negative value. And basically that just either adds or subtracts, multiples of 12 from the bass note. And let's see set the bass channel here. So right now we're playing a bass channel 3, which is coming through on my live channel here. Again, another separate instance of CZV. So as you can see, I like CZV. Now, how is it generating this bass note? Where is the bass note coming from? If we go up to our nested list of data, it's always pulling the bass note. It's always assuming that the first index of each list is the bass note. Now, as you can see, when I programmed in my chords with an offset of 48, this is really note 50, 54, 57, and so forth. As you can see, I programmed in this chord this way. I could have put 2, 7, 11. It would have been the same collection of notes. In terms of how the chords played, you wouldn't hear any difference. But I did that so that this is the root note. And so the auto-generated bass is admittedly very, very simple. It's just meant to have something else there to kind of fill out the arrangement, give you all something to hear. And so, again, very quickly implemented. I just wanted to have that as a baseline. It helps if you've got I basically did it primarily for when you've got the chords when is-arp turned off. In other words, you are just hearing the arpeggiated melody with no accompaniment, with no accompanying chords. I like hearing that bass note to be the sort of indicator of the tonality of what's ever going on. Anyway, you'll see what I mean by that shortly. So again, the bass note is always coming from here, and that's where, so like for instance, if you had the bass octave as 0, it would just be this first bass note would be note 50, right? And then this bass note would be 55. If you had that as, -1, that's going to be 50 minus 12, so it takes it down an octave. So I wanted to mention that. So back to the chords. So we want chords on when the arpeggiation is going. So we're hearing the chords and the arpeggiation. We've got this as a channel. Now the chord order, this works basically like ARP order above, but for chords now. And so if I were to play this right now, as you can see, chord order. As you can see, chord order isn't changing. It's just looping at index 0. So it's just repeating over and over again this first chord, and it's arpeggiating. We've got auto generate ARP order on, so it's just going through index 0, 1, 2, 0, 1, 2 of this chord. So it's just playing over and over again, note 50, note 54, note 57, at this rhythm, with no rests, because we've got this here. So let's change this to be like that. Additionally, we've got this. Actually, let's show this feature here. So auto generate chord order does the same thing as auto generate ARP order up here. It just kind of, if you had wanted to do what I just did, 0, 1, 2, that's playing them through in order. But if you just, let's say you had a larger number of chords and you didn't want to have to go through and program manually, tell them what order to play in. You could just, and you wanted to play them in the order you program them in notes, you could just do auto-generate chord order, and it would auto-generate that. So if you've got this as 1, it's going to override whatever is here. Again, this little comment, it doesn't override ARP order, but it does override chord order. So let's do this. So as you can see, there's interference now between the ARP order and the chord order. So that's already a little bit more interesting. Now let's say we wanted to program in a manual chord order. Let's say 1, 2, 0, 2. Let's make this even a little bit more interesting. Let's select one of our rest patterns up here. Let's use this one. And let's add an operator to this ARP rhythm. Let's make it twice as fast. So we're going to chop each of these values in half. So that means we're making it faster. Again, we're still really, really simple, but you can already hear that there's some interference going on. I think if we did something like this, it would make it even a little bit more interesting. As you can see, there was a 4 rest pattern and 2 unit rhythmic durations, so there wasn't much interference going on there, because every time, this is just repeating twice for every one of those 4. So I added a 5th one in to create some interference there. Now you notice that the ARP rhythm didn't change the chord rhythm. Where's my chord rhythm? Okay, so my chord rhythm down here, this dictates the actual rate of the chord changes. So let's change this. Great. Now this chord structure here, this doesn't affect this function. This is part of a little bit more experimental aspect of the program that currently doesn't work exactly like I wanted it to. But and this is another part of that as well. This start chord and root cycle gen. I'll talk about that more a bit later on. They're not really part of the basic functionality that relates to once you start dealing with auto-generating chords from your scale up here. It currently doesn't work correctly, just unless you do that. It doesn't do exactly what I wanted it to do, so I would ignore that if you're implementing things as I have right now. So that's basics of how to deal with chords, melody, and bass part, all generated from the same set of notes. It's just this, everything that was there just came from this basic thing here. As you can see, not super interesting music, but even just with that those simple sequences, we generated a pattern of music that had a lot of variation kind of built into it.